Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by and welcome to today's webinar entitled Virtual Interview Tips and Tricks. I'm Febbraro, Senior Education and Program Manager for the Society of American Military Engineers, coming to you from Alexandria, Virginia. I'll be in the background assisting with any technical issues you may be experiencing. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few tools you'll be able to use throughout the web seminar. To the right of your top right of your screen, we have 4 features for you. There's the chat. Here's where you can let us know if you're experiencing any technical difficulties and any discussion points directed to the speaker. Click the chat button. Next, type your comment and send. Let's quickly test the chat feature for our attendees on the call. Please type which room you're in today and where you are located. I don't see any coming in. Okay, so the Q&A, to submit a written question at any time during the event, click the Q&A button. Next, type your question and click send. If you'd like a question to be seen in the box, you can upvote it. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the presentation, and we will hold questions until the end. We will answer as many as time allows. There are polls. Yes, we have a few of those. When the poll pops up, make your selection and submit. Don't forget to toggle back to the poll to view the results. Handouts. We have uploaded today's presentation ready for you to download at your convenience during the webinar. We would like to thank our sponsors for today, the ECHO 3 Foundation. You will earn 1 PDH credit for today if you're registered for the virtual JTC. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. It is our extreme pleasure to introduce Colleen Bryan, Chief Operations Officer for ECHO 3 Foundation, coming to you from beautiful Alaska. Colleen, you now have the digital floor, so take it away. Colleen, are you with us? Okay, let's start with a poll. So, hand on heart, are you wearing your PJs right now? We're going to launch the poll. And we'll give you 15 seconds to answer it. Oh, some people are deciding, what should we do? What should I say? Should I be real? Answers are still coming in. This is great. Okay, 3, 2, 1. We're going to close the poll. So toggle over to the poll to view the results. Next, I'd love to introduce our esteemed speaker. We have Laura Early. And over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Belle. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Early. I'm the Deputy Director and co-founder of a company called Wise Advise and Assist Team. It's a virtual assisting agency powered by military spouses. So you'll see on here some fun facts. I've traveled to 31 countries. I've conducted over 500 virtual interviews, which is why I'm here today to talk to you about virtual interview tips and tricks. I'm also a military spouse, and I'm also coming to you from Alexandria, Virginia. So Belle and I are pretty close to each other at the moment, but we're excited to have you here today. I hope you will interact with us. Send questions through the chat. Feel free to make comments. This is for you, and I want you to get the most out of it that you can. So definitely feel free to interact with us. So we have a poll question. I'd like to know how many of you have virtually interviewed before, so I kind of know where you're at with your experience. Well, we pulled close the poll, so let's see what we have. I don't see the answers, Belle. Are they going to pop up for me, or do they pop up for you? So no, we've got some yeses. I've got some people answering me in the chat, so that's totally fine. So some people have not. So we've got a good group here, mixtured, and some people have experience, some people don't. So that's great. So we have most of you have not, 71%, and about 13% of you have. So this should be a lot of good information for each of you. So I'm excited to share it with you. Again, if you have questions throughout, just pop them in the chat. Happy to answer those questions for you. Okay, here we go. So virtual interview 101. One of the most important things for you to remember with a virtual interview is that you should have the same expectations for it as you do for an in-person interview, but also that we, the company that's going to be interviewing virtually, have the exact same expectations of you. We treat these interviews just like we would an in-person interview. We expect you to know the position. We expect you to know about our company, know what you bring to the table, and 100%, we always expect you to prepare for the interview. Any of you who have been through any sort of interview coaching or resume writing, all of that, you'll hear this over and over again, and it sounds a little redundant, but I always like to tell you it's very, very important that you prepare for an interview. And then the other thing that you want to make sure that you do with a virtual interview is prepare and ask about the process. What sort of process is it going to be? Is it going to be phone interviews? Is it going to be all video interviews, pre-recorded interviews? How many interviews are you going to have? When can you expect to hear? Who's going to be your point of contact? All of that information is really important for you to have, and it's okay to ask that of the hiring manager. So make sure that you ask about the process as you're going through the process. Technology. It's really important to know what technology is going to be used during the virtual interview. Is it a video call? Is it a pre-recorded call where they ask you a question and then you jump in? Or is it going to be a phone call? Find out that information. Ask which platform it's going to be on, and make sure that you test the platform before your interview. This is really important. You don't want to be fumbling around on the platform when you walk into the interview. You want to be prepared. Use a computer or an iPad, not a phone. Please don't use a phone unless you have a nice phone stand that it sits on that we can see, that we can't see, so the phone is stable. You don't want to be holding your phone and walking around during an interview. It makes you look extremely unprofessional and not prepared. Oh, I'm getting a no audio. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you pop it in the chat if you can hear me? You guys hear me okay? Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you. So make sure that, again, you have a stable device that you're using. Make sure that you have a working camera. That's super duper important. Check the angle of your camera, the height of the camera. You want it to be eye level, so that we're not looking up at your chin or down on the top of your face. You want to make sure that it's eye level with your camera. Stack it on some books. You can use lots of different things to make this better for you, but make sure that you've got a good camera and that it's eye level. Check your internet speed and connection. This is really important. You want to make sure that you come through clear and that there's no interruption in your sound or in the interview. Sorry, guys. So use headphones for better sound quality. It's super important that you're using headphones for your sound. It makes you come through clearer. It pushes any background noise. It makes sure that the person can hear you okay in the background, and make sure that they can't hear lawnmowers, kids, all of those types of things. Give me 1 second, guys. I have my slide issue, so let me see what I can find.
Do you want me to move to the next slide for you?
I've got it now. It just wasn't liking my mouse. Okay, design your space. Make sure that you have an extremely professional background. This is really important. Nothing busy behind you, not in a coffee shop or outside, no doors so that you can see who's coming through. And make sure that there's no beds. They can't tell that you're in a bedroom, a hotel, or wherever you might be taking your interview. It's really important that it's not busy in the background. This includes just things that are behind you. Remember your square box that they see of you. This is the first impression that you're giving to the interview people. They only get to see the square box of your life, you from the waist up. So you want to make sure you're putting a really professional face forward. So if you have a bunch of pictures behind you that you wouldn't want this company to see if they came to your house, then you don't want them behind you for a virtual interview. Good lighting is really important. Make sure that you have really great lighting. You want to use windows on your left or your right. You don't want them behind you. You don't want them in front of you because that puts a huge glare on your face. So use lamps positionally in your room. Make sure that you test your lighting before your interview. Make sure that, again, you don't have a big glare in your face and you don't have things in front of you. Be professional. You don't want any distractions. Make sure that you turn off all the notifications on your computer and you let all of your household members know that you are in an interview. You don't want kids, dogs, whoever else is in your house walking in the middle of your interview. A lot of us who work in the virtual space put up a sign on our door that says on a video call, on a virtual call. Make sure that you do that. You prepare the people in your home to know that you're on an interview. Yes, someone just asked, do you ever do a test before an interview? What apps do you use? I absolutely do a test before an interview. Sometimes I'll just test it on my camera on my phone. Other times I'll test on Zoom. Zoom is a video meeting platform that you can use for free, and I definitely always hop on there. Use mute to your advantage. A lot of us, especially right now during this pandemic, are working from home. We have a lot of distractions going on. I've even done some interviews with people during this time. So make sure that you use mute to your advantage. You know where the mute button is within the software. Dress professionally. This is super duper important. I can't tell you how many virtual interviews I have been in that people were in sweatshirts, or they were in t-shirts, or they were in blouses and not jackets. Remember, I can only see you from about your midriff up, not even full your waist up, depending on your camera angle. So make sure that it's professional. Just because it's a video interview and not in person doesn't mean and doesn't give you permission to dress casual. And so again, remember that we have the same expectations as a hiring company for this interview as we do for, you know, for the in-person interview. We want to see that you're professional and ready for this job. Remember to look at the camera. It's really important when you're nervous, you tend to look around. When you don't have someone you're looking at, maybe you're doing a pre-recording video, you need to remember to look at the camera. They want to see your face. They want to know that you're listening to them, and it can appear like you're not listening if you're looking down. Interview. Again, this is an interview that is the same as an in-person interview. So you need to understand the role and the company that you're interviewing for. Prepare your answers just like you would for an in-person interview. Have questions prepared to ask them. Even if all of your questions have already been answered in the process, it's important to ask them again in person. This shows the company that you're interested in them and that you see value in what they're offering. So always have questions. Don't be there, I have no questions. You're about to take a role with a company that you've never worked for before. And they want to know that you're interested and you have questions, that you want to know more about this position. So think of something, even if you already know the answer, be prepared and ask questions. It's okay for there to be silence. There's going to be moments of silence within the call. There's going to be moments where people don't know what, where they don't know what to say, or they're thinking of their next question, or they're looking for the next question. So it's okay for there to be a moment of silence. It's okay for you to take a moment and think about what you want to say next. I know a lot of times we want to fill the silence, and you don't have to do that. Even on a video call, there's going to be a lull. There might be a delay. Make sure you ask about what the job's going to entail. So you're doing a virtual interview. Does this mean that the job's going to be remote, or is it going to be in office? If it is going to be remote, ask about the expectations and requirements. What type of technology are you going to need to do this work? What are the expectations required? What's going to be needed in order for you to fulfill this role? It's really important that you ask them about this. Should interviewers send questions in advance? That's up to you, Carrie Ann. I don't like to send questions in advance because I want to see their response to the question and what they're thinking about. So I don't send questions in advance, but that's completely up to you in the interview. Virtual requires intentional communication. They get to see, again, only a small square box of your life. They don't get to see your mannerisms. They don't get to see even how tall you are, or if you fidget, or what's going on. So you have to over communicate certain things about yourself and about your interests. You need to be expressive in the interview. You need to make sure that they know if you're excited for this role or not. So again, testing a video interview, if you've never done one before, hop on a video call, record yourself on a video on your camera, so that you're prepared for what you're going to look like on screen. So I'd love to launch the next poll, take a minute to launch the next poll. What makes you most nervous in a virtual interview? Is it the interview itself? Is it the technology? Is it being on camera? Or is it all of the above? Got some answers coming in. Okay, we'll give it a few minutes for everyone to answer and then we'll hop on. Okay, let's see what everyone said. So we have about 42% of you are nervous about the interview itself, which is completely natural. Most of us get really nervous when we have an interview. 17% of you said the technology, which is why I encourage you to test the technology. If you're nervous about the technology, test, test, test. 29% said being on camera. I definitely understand that. I don't like looking at myself on camera. A trick for that is you can actually put a paper up on the screen over where you are, especially if you're recording something, so you don't have to look at yourself while you're in the interview. And then 13% of you said all of the above, which is natural. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the interview itself. Let's talk about just some tips and tricks for when you're doing virtual interviews. Practice makes perfect. It's really important that you are practicing for an interview just like you would in person. You, again, practice the technology, practice being on camera, make sure you've tested your lighting, you know what you're going to look like on camera, and then plan for the unexpected. Technology is our best friend and our worst enemy. Things happen. Internet goes out, our computers malfunction, things go wrong. So make sure that you have a contact for someone at the company so that you can call them and say, hey, I'm not able to get into the call. I'm having issues with my computer. You know, my internet dropped in the middle of the call. Please tell them I'm rejoining. Make sure that you have a contact for them so that you can get in touch with them. Again, making sure that you have a backup internet, having a hotspot is a really good idea. You've tested your internet connection. You've restarted your router before the call so that you ensure you have the highest speed internet. And we'll talk a little bit about internet tips, but that is something that you definitely want to make sure you can do. Like I said, have a backup device or a hotspot ready. Join the call early. Try to join the interview about 10 minutes before so that you can test it, you can make sure it works, and you're there on time. And again, have the contact information of the person you're meeting. Okay. Oh, we already did the poll. Sorry, I jumped the gun, Belle, and I did it a little bit early. Oh, there's a slide missing. Okay, we'll go back. So again, talking about the camera, making sure that it's at height for your eyes so that they can see you, they can see a good impression of you. You want to make sure that they get the best view of you possible. Especially if it's their first interview with you. A lot of times companies will do call interviews and not do a virtual interview the first time. So you definitely want to make sure that you're interacting with them, that you know what's going to happen next. And then again, like I said, with the internet, restarting your router is a tip that we use all the time. If you know that you have a virtual interview coming up, definitely you should be restarting your router every single week. That helps your internet and bandwidth be better. But again, you want to make sure that you're doing it ahead of a virtual interview to make sure that you have the internet capacity that you need. And remember that the people on the other side are here for you. They're championing for you. They want to see if you're a good fit for the company. It's a conversation. And that's one of the things I tell a lot of people when it comes to interviews. Think of it as a conversation. You want to get to know them and the company just as much. You should want to get to know them and the company just as much as they want to get to know you to see if you're going to be a fit. So make it a conversation. Ask questions to ensure that that you know what the role is and that you're going to be a good fit for the role. Make sure that you've looked at your resume before the call and that you know what your job history is, because they're going to ask you questions about what you wrote. So make sure that you've looked over it recently or that morning to make sure that you're prepared for it. So I'd love to take a few questions about some of these technology pieces and some of these things that you are nervous about. What is it about the technology that makes you nervous? Yes, definitely find out the company if you can test the software. Yes, VPNs, that's a great comment in the chat. VPNs can impact your connection. And so you definitely want to make sure that you are, again, testing that connection ahead of time, but you're turning off VPNs, you're turning off your notifications in the background, you're turning off those distractions in order to have the best interview possible. Yes, there is
Laura,
a
this
few
is
good
Colleen.
online. Yes, go ahead, Colleen.
Speaking of technology issues, I'm sorry I'm a little tardy to the party, but happy to be part of the conversation. As you were talking about virtual interview skills, do you think there's any advantages over participating in a virtual interview as opposed to a traditional face-to-face, and then also disadvantages?
I would say advantages to a virtual interview is you get to be in your own space. You get to be comfortable in your own space. You can be in pajamas from the waist down, just don't stand up. So definitely be prepared for that. But I think that's one of the advantages, that you get to be comfortable in your own space. You can maybe put an inspirational quote or a picture or something that's comforting for you behind the computer so that you can see that and think of that. You could also have notes up behind the screen in the middle of your virtual interview, and they would never know. So that's one of the advantages, I think, to being in a virtual interview. One of the disadvantages, I think, is that a lot of people get very, very nervous on camera. They get really nervous and fidgety, and they don't look at you. And so that can be a definite disadvantage for people who aren't familiar with camera. And I think another disadvantage is they don't get to see you in person. They don't get to meet you, and people are just different in person. They're typically more charismatic in person than virtually. You only get kind of a small feel for the person and who they are. So those are what I say would be advantages or disadvantages.
Guys, talking about cameras, can we reveal your beautiful faces right now and put you on our cameras?
Here we are. Colleen, are you going to join me? You're going to make me do it myself.
I'm going to see if I can, I'm going to press my luck with technology today and try to turn on a camera and call in with my phone at the same time.
Yes, definitely. Look at the camera instead of off to the side. You absolutely want to pretend the interview is right in front of you. I can't tell you how many times, again, I've sat in a virtual interview and someone's like this, or they're like this, because your camera's up here and your screen is here. So you're looking at me on the screen, but you're not looking at your camera. And so I can't tell if you're looking at me or not. So that's really important, to make sure that you're looking them in the eye while you're talking to them. And you're talking to them like they're a person, not a robot on the screen, because they are a person. They're in this interview with you and they want it to be a conversation. So definitely a great tip for someone. And again, a great way to do that, I have my computer right now stacked on a pile of books. That's a great way to have the computer at your eye level so that you're looking at the computer and you have it at a level that makes sense, so they're not seeing this view of you or this view of you. Excuse me.
Do you think it's typically up to the interviewer or to the interviewee to be able to request whether it's a phone interview, whether it's a Skype interview? Whose decision is it ultimately, would you say, in the interview process?
I would say it's definitely the company. They're going to have a process and a way that they do things. And the reality is a lot of us are just as nervous about being on camera with you as you are with us, especially if it's a company that's not a virtual company like mine. I'm on virtual calls all day long. And so I'm really used to being on camera. But for a lot of people now, especially in light of this pandemic, they've been doing virtual interviews and they're not used to being on camera either. I think it's great to request one if you can, but just remember they're going to go with what they think is best.
I think so often you hear in face-to-face interviews of don't bring up certain things on the first interview, such as don't bring up salary, don't bring up, whether or not you have children, perhaps that might be an HR issue. How would you suggest handling things like that, especially now during COVID, where you have all these other distractions and you don't have that same kind of protection over your environment that you would in a face-to-face office interview?
Yeah, and so that's why I say make sure the door isn't behind you and it's in your eyesight, because then you can control who comes into your room. And if you see someone come into your room, you can control them before they get to the camera. We've all seen those Fubs on GMA and all these other people who have given us incredible material, those of us who do virtual, where they've had kids crawling across their screen or people, or their camera's been face down and we can tell they're in their pajamas. And so that's, again, why you test the software. But that's why it's important that you set up your environment for success. You let everyone know that you're on a virtual interview, you control your environment. Again, I always make sure the door is over here so I can see it in my eyesight every time. I know if the dog or my husband or kids or whoever is coming through the door to interrupt me. And then using headphones, again, helps if there is background noise to just make it, soften it so that they can't hear it. But then again, during this pandemic, it's a really interesting time. I know that we've done interviews and there's a little bit more grace when you're in a season like this where you're kind of forced to be at home and everyone's forced to be at home with you. That's very different than a typical season where, you know, we wouldn't expect people to have extra coworkers, as we call them, or family members at home.
Do you have recommendations for how interviewees can handle that gracefully? Do you disclose right off the bat, hey, you might hear some noise in the background, kids, pets, spouses, the like, or do you just try to go for it until you have one of those distractions that pops up and then you address it then? Any advice?
I appreciate anyone who just gives it to me up front, who just tells me, you know, I really appreciate you taking this interview and I tried to schedule it at a time that works, but I just wanted to let you know that I do have, you know, some construction going on outside my house, or I have this going on. So there might be a little bit noise and maybe I'm going to mute myself and keep myself muted unless I'm talking to prevent that background noise. And that helps. They want to know if you tell them and give them a heads up rather than all of a sudden there's someone walking across your screen. You know, they get it. They're people too. Someone just asked thoughts on makeup for those who wear it. So camera makeup, you always want to make sure is a little bit heavier than your regular makeup, but you don't want to go too overboard. I always love, you'll see I have a brighter lip on because I have fair skin and blonde hair. So I love a brighter lip because it helps me stand out against my background. You want to make sure that whatever background you're using, that the clothes you're wearing, it complements each other. It doesn't blur you out. I stay away from virtual backgrounds in interviews because if you haven't used one before, you can fade in and out of the virtual background really, really easily. But again, know your kind of your skin tone and your hair and what looks good for you. I would take a picture of yourself before you hop on the virtual interview. Does it look good in the picture? Because if it looks good in the picture, it'll probably look good on the camera as well. But that's a great question.
I think that's a great point that you had about the virtual background. I think a lot of people are really curious and it's just a fun thing to introduce into other webinars or other meetings that you may be having to really make sure that you aren't glitching around your silhouette because that's a distraction. And I think your point was you're trying to really minimize distractions during the interview, right?
Yes, you definitely want to minimize distractions. You want to definitely make sure that things are off. You're in a space where you can focus. Your phone's on silent. You don't have other things going on in the background of you, so you're not taking it in the dining room while people are in the living room watching TV. And
we do have another question about backgrounds from Pete over here. He'd like to know more about your opinion on canned background photos and those that are available in Teams and Zoom.
Be careful and practice before you use them. You definitely want to make sure that that you've tested it before, because again, that fading in and out of the background can definitely happen. And you want to make sure that you are familiar with the background. A lot of people use backdrops, which are a little bit better than the background.
Great question over here about headphones. You and I are both wearing corded headphones. Michael would like to know about headphones being acceptable as professional. I haven't taken the plunge to drop on some AirPods, but I mean, that would definitely be better than this, in my opinion. Curious to know what you think, Laura.
Yeah, I think headphones give you a clearer sound. I wouldn't use like big Bose headphones that cover your head. I have AirPods. I'm not using them right now because they don't like to connect to my computer well. So that's another thing you want to be careful with headphones, that they connect well, but I don't think they're unprofessional. They help your sound come through clearer. And if it's an issue, you can always ask them.
Mm-hmm. think it goes back to your original point of really balancing that aesthetic of a professional environment, presenting yourself professionally, but then also making sure it's really compatible with the technology. You need to be able to present yourself clearly the way you're speaking, be able to hear the other person clearly, and that you need to make sure you're making technological decisions that support that, and you're not going with the aesthetic over the technology.
Right.
But as it relates to aesthetic, Danielle would like to know if you have recommendations over a blank wall or some room behind you, and you and I have one of each.
Yeah, we have one of each. I have a blank wall right now because I just painted this wall, and I haven't found art that I really like that that kind of complements and works in the room. I think you can use a clear background if you don't have anything else. I, again, would stay away from, you want to show them, especially for us, I'm a virtual company, so I'm interviewing you virtually for you to work virtually. So I want to see that your square box that you have, that you could do client meetings in that space. And so I would actually recommend in that it's a blank background or a wall with photos. It's not your living room, sorry, Colleen, or your bedroom or something like that. It's showing that you have a professional space where you can take the interview.
I'll throw in my own personal caveat there. Typically, I work remotely also, and I have a dedicated office space, but you never know what's going to happen with technology. And so for me, it was important to choose the best room in the house with the strongest Wi-Fi. So again, it's that kind of give and take. So I appreciate you answering that question.
Yeah, again, think about the position you're interviewing for. Is it a virtual company or is it not? Because they're going to be evaluating different things if it's a virtual company than they are if they're just doing a virtual interview.
Absolutely. I was curious to know also if you have any memorable, really positive or not so positive interviews that you've either been on the interview side of or on the interviewee side of that then became some of your best practices that you shared during your presentation today.
I did. I had someone sitting on their stairs in their home in a hooded sweatshirt, and I was caught really off guard. And I didn't know kind of what to do. It was one of those things that caught me off guard. And I was like, do we just keep going and hope it gets better? And just like wonder if this is their professionalism. Another one I had was why I say don't use a phone. I had someone on a phone and they were literally, I'll use my phone as an example, we're like this the whole time and moving, jerking, and we couldn't see. So those were two memorable ones for me. I have had people just with distractions in their background or again, you can tell that they weren't prepared to be on camera. They were maybe in a t-shirt or not dressed professionally. That's usually the one I see the most, that people aren't, that I am more professionally dressed than the person I'm interviewing, which I never like to see. I always want to make sure that that you should be the most professional person in the room, not me, the person doing the interview. So that's something. But I have seen all of these cases. Like I have seen, just like that video that came out of the girl who went to the bathroom on her phone. Like I have seen people not realize they're on camera. I've seen people pick their nose. I have seen people, people's kids. And so again, that's why I say all these practice things. And I used to say these things and people would roll their eyes and be like, that doesn't really happen. But now thanks to this pandemic and everyone being virtual and all of these things now have been put on social media, I have lots of material to be like, no, remember this reporter did it. It does happen. It happens to people. So yes, I've seen all of the things that I mentioned today. Carrie Ann asked a great question. Are there privacy or HR issues with showing your home or background noises, hearing kids? That's really up to you. But again, if you wouldn't want that person to walk into your home and see whatever is behind you, it shouldn't be behind you on the interview. That's just my stance on it. If you don't want them to know you have kids, you probably shouldn't have your family photo behind you or have your kids in the room or whatever it is. So I would, again, make sure that identifying information is something that you would want them to know.
Have you ever had a really standout virtual interview where they just totally crushed it, knocked it out of the park, and they did something really unique that you hadn't seen or hadn't heard in other virtual interviews?
I think the best virtual interviews I've ever had are people, again, who are dressed professionally. You can tell that they prepared their background. I've been able to tell before when people are like sitting on the floor because you can see the outlets and stuff behind them. So the ones that are always the best, they're dressed professionally. They don't come in nervous. You can tell they've been on camera before. They're talking to me like I'm a person in a conversation, not a meme on the screen. They answer my questions thoroughly. They have questions for me. It flows. The conversation flows, and there's not kind of that awkward like, okay, I feel like I need to re-ask because you just said the same thing that you said at the last question and the last question. So those are my favorite interviews, just like they are in person. I love really engaged folks. I love people who have questions for me, people that make it, go smoothly for me as an interviewer.
So let's say somebody is a virtual interviewee. They are really nervous going into the interview. They feel like they didn't do very well. Perhaps from your perspective as the interviewer, they didn't do very well. What can they do to help maybe salvage that interview and maybe still land the job?
Follow up. It is amazing to me how many people do not send follow-up emails or thank you emails. Like, thank you so much for the call today. I really appreciated it, which is great. And I love when people send me an email saying they really appreciate it. But what I love more is saying, I thought about what you said in the interview and I just wanted to readdress, or I'm really excited about this position because of something that you said during the interview, or something that you said about the company struck me. And I think that this and I would make a good fit. So I love that type of conversation and that type of engagement in follow-up.
I have a question for you about whether or not interviewees should be expected to perform any kind of skills proficiency during a virtual interview. In my background as marketing communications, it's not uncommon to provide a writing sample to show you can do something in InDesign. Should interviewees be prepared to do those types of things in a virtual interview?
I don't typically do those in the interview itself. If I'm going to do any sort of proficiency, it's going to be before the interview or after, and it's going to be follow-up. It's going to be follow-up questions. I am going to ask you in an interview what softwares you know, what technical proficiencies you have, those types of questions to make sure you're qualified for the job. But any sort of portfolio or testing should be done before the interview or after, so I have a chance to look at it and review it and then ask you questions about it.
Okay. We also have a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat. One is from Brenda, who'd like to know how you handle any kind of sound lag and when it looks like you are talking over the interviewer.
So sound lag typically happens when you have a poor internet connection or when they have a poor internet connection. So I always suggest muting yourself and maybe turning off your camera and then turning it back on and letting them know that you're doing so. I hear a lag, so I'm gonna mute, unmute, turn off my camera and just let them know. Put it out in the open that I'm hearing a lag. So I don't mean to interrupt you or speak over you. I'm just hearing a slight delay. So again, put the elephant in the room, bring it up to them so they know what you're dealing with.
Great. Do you think you could go back to doing face-to-face interviews after having so much experience doing virtual?
I have done in-person interviews since being virtual. I do like them because I get a sense of a person that I don't get virtually, and I'm a high E, so I get energy from being around people. So I do love that physical presence of being in a room with a person. But I actually like being in the comfort of my own space when I'm interviewing as well. It makes me more comfortable in an interview as the interviewer. And I feel like I actually ask better questions and I'm less stuffy than I am in person, which is really interesting, I think.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I have. Laura, I really appreciate your time participating in this presentation today. Anybody in the comments, whether in the Q&A or the chat, if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask for Laura, I ask that you please put them in the Q&A right now while we still have Laura's expertise on the line.
And I would say too, if you're using a browser, like we had this with today, with this technology we're using, because it's a web browser platform, make sure that you've updated your software on your computer or on your iPad, that you've got the newest version of Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're using. Spencer's question about, is the background for the facilitator okay for an interview? So is my background okay? Yes. I would say a blank background is definitely preferred, or telling that you're in an office. But think about the company you're interviewing. When I interview people, I'm interviewing people for a virtual position. And so I want to see that the space they have and their environment is conducive for them having client video calls and doing client work. So I'm looking for a little bit something different in a background than someone who's maybe doing a virtual interview for an in-person job. Do you see tolerance for at-home distractions remaining during after COVID? I think it depends on the company. I think COVID has brought a lot of awareness around working from home and what it's like to work from home. And I think people are liking that component of being virtual, and it's giving them more tolerance because we're having to understand the humanness of people, the humanality of people. So I hope it stays. I think there's some things that have happened within our organization that we hope to stick around after this. And I hope it's the same for other companies as well. Should you sit in front of the camera or step out? You should always be prepared that if they pull you into that interview, you're ready. So if you're in the interview room and you should be ready to be on that interview. You shouldn't be walking around, because what if they pull you onto the screen and you're like over here? You don't want to do that.
Related to interviews, but also kind of not, piggybacking off someone's question about COVID,
Sure.
What are your thoughts on how life is going to change with the environment of working from home going forward?
Oh, I think I just lost my camera.
I think I just lost your video.
Yep, I'll turn it. I think it just turned off. I'll turn it back on. I hope it changes things. I hope that people become, first of all, they understand how people can be way more efficient in working remotely. I think people are incredibly more efficient working remotely than they are in offices. I hope that people learn that I've heard some companies say, wow, our people waste an hour and a half or 2 hours in the morning commuting in. And if they worked remotely, that's extra time they could give. So I've heard people talk about how they're going to start their day later and for their company. I think that those things, I hope they stick around. I hope people, organizations, founders, CEOs really listen to their people and keep those things in. I do think remote work was already on the rise. It's grown 115% since 2005. And so I think it's going to continue to go that way. We were already headed in the direction of a lot more remote positions because it's lower overhead and better for organizations. So I think either this period of COVID-19 is going to show companies roles that they didn't think they could do remotely, that they can do those remotely. I think there's also going to be companies that are going to be so tired of being on camera and being on calls and being at home that they won't want to do anything virtual for at least 3 to 6 months. So I think it's going to vary based on the organization, but I hope that it continues to bring about awareness for remote work and the balance that it can bring to people's lives, and also the efficiency that it can bring to your organization.
Lori Reevely, I know that name. She's curious to know if my background would be okay for an interview.
I would say for my company, we could do the interview as long as there was no one walking and no distractions or anything. But again, because I'm a virtual company looking to look for people who can do virtual interviews, I prefer very clean professional backgrounds, not living room, family room, things like that. Just because, again, if you're on a call with a client, I don't want them seeing your living room, if that makes sense. Or I've seen people, beds in the back of their backgrounds before. But again, if her background is very clean and neat, and so I think for a typical company, it might be okay. But again, you want to make sure it's very clean, neat, not busy, not distracting. Because the other thing you don't want to be wondering is, what's on that wall behind Colleen? Like, what's on that picture? Oh, is that a clock over there? Like, you don't want to distract people by what's going on in your background.
That's a great point.
You can definitely implement these tips in your virtual working environment. We've been a 100% remote company for 5 years. And so we talk a lot about what working remotely means and how you conversate and how you have meetings and what it looks like. So I definitely love the virtual space. And I'm glad, Wendy, that this forum was good practice for you. The biggest thing you have to remember is the people on the other side of the interview are people too. They get nervous, they get awkward. They don't always know how to respond to what you say. So take a deep breath. And the best thing you can do when you go on an interview is to be yourself. They're looking to see if you're a good fit for their organization. So they want to meet you in the interview, not your alter ego of you.
Mm-hmm.
What about
Danielle? That's a really interesting comment.
We are seeing our government clients conducting virtual interviews and have one client who moved from a written proposal to a video proposal. Yes. We've seen a lot of virtual videos, video connection via email. It's great. What about natural rooms with an electronically blurred background? I'm not sure what you mean by electronically blurred, but like so that it's your regular room, but it's a little bit blurred so I can't see it. I think that would be okay as long as it's not distracting.
Yeah, that's an option in Teams, probably some other video options as well, but it's your own background, but it's blurred out behind you.
It's blurred out a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That'll be really curious to see with Danielle's comment, wondering if more just bidders are going to be leaning toward virtual interviews as opposed to even the phone interview. I've done my fair share of phone interviews for projects. And it's always really kind of clunky. You know, you're trying to explain something that you're looking at, that you've sent them a PowerPoint slide for. Maybe they're following along at the same rate you are. Virtual is really, I think, a much better way to present yourself with video as opposed to just over the phone. So it'll be interesting to see if the government and other contracting entities move that direction as a result of this.
I think so too. I love being able to see someone's face because you can only tell so much about someone over the phone. So being able to see what someone looks like and who they are and a little bit about how they present themselves, how do they talk, do they use their hands, do they not, you know, like all of those things are things that I really enjoy seeing in interviews. And again, we're all typically better in person than we are on the phone. At least I think so.
The body language alone, I mean, it's so telling, so telling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Laura, is there anything else that you would like to share that hasn't been asked already?
I think the biggest thing is just to remember that like interviews are nerve-wracking no matter what, whether they're in person or virtual, because if you really want the job, then you want to make sure it goes well. But just remember to take a deep breath, to be yourself, to study the company, to have questions prepared, and to just know what you're walking into in a virtual interview. Again, test that platform if you can so that you are comfortable with it. You know where the mute button is, you know where the unmute button is, you know where the camera on, camera off is, so that you're not fumbling around when you first join the interview.
Very solid advice. And the next time I end up doing a virtual interview, I will make sure that I am not in my living room per your recommendation. So pro tip, thank you. I think, Belle, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to leave everybody with?
Yes. Thank you so much for today's presentation. Colleen, execution on the moderator was phenomenal. And Laura, we can't thank you enough for sharing your expertise with us today. At the end of the webinar, you'll be directed to our JTC website where you will see the great program we have for you. So if you've registered, you can visit the Attendee Service Center and make your session selections. Don't worry if you change your mind. You'll have up to 1 hour prior to when the session starts to confirm. This concludes the webinar for today. Please disconnect and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.